welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I got Derrek Bennet from Atheologica, and the link is in the description, guys. Go and check out Atheologica. I would show it on the screen right now, but I got this beautiful, beautiful presentation that we're only going to give you a little taste of, because if you want the full thing, you're going to have to go to patreon.com/ is it Derrek Bennet or Atheologica?
I believe it's Derrek Bennet from my Patreon.
Yes. And that's where they can get the full presentation of what they're about to see. So before we even, let's tell them about this presentation and the scholarship behind it.
So yeah, my primary research is on the whole dying, rising God phenomenon in the ancient world, as well as just immortalized heroes and kings in general, basically historical analogies to the death and resurrection of Christ, as well as his exaltation. And it was James George Fraser who popularized this idea back in the 19th century. And he since, over the years, he's undergone a lot of fire for that, because he got some things right, but he also got some things wrong in his methodology.
He also had no Google, no internet. He was just literally looking
at. He didn't have any of that.
Yeah, so he had a lot of stuff right though. But go ahead.
Right, he got a lot of stuff right, but his methodology could be dubious at times, and he did some perhaps anachronistic type things as well, and might have drawn too much of a genetic relationship between these divinities and Christ. We don't know that this stuff is necessarily borrowed per se. We're not talking about copycat nonsense that you hear from apologists, the straw man you so often hear from them. But it seems as though the death knell came in 1987, and thereafter when Jonathan Z. Smith did his sort of scorched earth thing against Fraser, when he did a Dying and Rising Gods entry in Mercialiades Encyclopedia of Religion. And there he just kind of blew it apart. He said, look, there are no dying and rising gods per se. Did I just cut out? Am I still here?
Yeah, you're here. You're here.
There you are. So Jonathan Z. Smith, who said, no, there are no dying and rising gods. What you have basically are either gods who die and stay dead, or disappearing gods. They disappear for a time and then they reappear. There's no dying and rising gods. And Bart Ehrman and others like him have taken the bait. That's all they know. That's all they'll talk about, because they don't know what?
Let me jump in for 1 second. I hate that people get annoyed when I do this, but I have to say this, because a lot of these dying and rising gods, right? Some of them are agricultural, so the myth will have them die. Like in the case of Yasio, so I just did a video on. He dies. He's the lover of Demeter. He dies. He gets killed by Zeus. There is no myth that actually says he comes back to life, but he does, because springtime happens, and then he goes back in love with Demeter again. It's implied. Now, here's the thing. Christians will say, oh, our dying and rising God, it's about salvation, believing in his resurrection. Sure, you got that. Fine. But that's like saying, oh, we're both wearing a shirt, and you're not wearing a shirt because yours is red and mine's gray. Like we're comparing details, but it doesn't mean that we're not both wearing shirts. If that makes sense. So I just want to throw that out there. It's like you want to say dying and rising gods don't exist. It's like that's not true. But if you want to argue over the details about them, then yeah, we can talk about that. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Mine is a Dr. Pepper and yours is a regular Coke. They're completely different.
Therefore, you don't have a pop. Yours is not soda because it's not Coke. It's like it's still a soda. Yeah.
So things really began to turn around. They began to change. If James George Fraser swung the pendulum too far in one direction, Jonathan Z. Smith seems to have swung the pendulum too far in the other direction. And now, more recently, things are coming toward a nice middle. Initially with Trygve Medinger, a Swedish scholar who did a book on dying and rising gods back in 2001, so about 20 years ago. And he said, Fraser's gone a little too far. We do have some cases of, divinities who did indeed die and were returned to life in some form. And his work is actually, looking back, it's a bit modest, I think, but at least he was making progress in that department. More recently, in 2018, you had John Granger Cook's Empty Tomb, Resurrection, Apotheosis, probably the most comprehensive work to date on this topic, and he very much resurrects the idea, so to speak. And you're seeing this in a newer generation of scholars have really begun to bring the pendulum, like I said, back toward the middle, where they're recognizing that, yes, we absolutely do have divinities who died and rose in some form, but we're not necessarily arguing that that early Christians just borrowed that idea from the surrounding environment. It's just kind of par for the course. It's the kind of motif, the kind of claim you would expect from that time and place in history. I think the resurrection of Jesus has a more complicated, circuitous route in terms of its origins, is how that belief came about. But it's absolutely something analogous to other such divinities in antiquity.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Well, I pretty well summarized that, so we can take it from there.
Yeah. So why don't we? So I got your presentation up. I don't know. Do you want to give some examples on, just so for someone who's like, I've never heard of a God that dies and rise except for Jesus? What would the first thing you would go to?
Yeah, let's introduce this. We'll read this slide here. As it says, the New Testament's depiction of Christ's resurrection, immortalization, and exaltation to heaven is not unique in the context of ancient Mediterranean myth and legend. Several key figures from antiquity are discussed in this presentation. This is a presentation I gave for the Global Center for Religious Research. I also gave it for the MidVision podcast, and you can find it on my YouTube channel as well on Atheologica. But if we're going by the definition, death followed by bodily restoration to life, if that's what we mean by resurrection, I think that's a pretty straightforward definition. Then we absolutely have that in the form of several divinities from the ancient world. Probably first and foremost, the Egyptian god Osiris. Christian apologists and even secular scholars like Bart Ehrman try to deny that there is such a motif in the Osiris myth, but there most certainly is if you actually study
100%.
Yeah, if you study the ancient texts and the scholarship from Egyptologists, in fact, who know better than anyone what they're talking about, we do have a resurrection myth here.
You also have a Eucharist.
What's that?
You also have a Eucharist in Osiris, where he talks about eating the cakes and drinking the wine in the name of Osiris.
You have something analogous to that, certainly, where they would make.
They don't call it a Eucharist, though. I'm not going to claim that, but
no. But they would make breaded molds of his form, of his body, and they would partake of that. And It was consuming the power of the gods so that they themselves could inherit that kind of immortality.
And that's a very specific thing. That's a very specific thing. Like for someone like, okay, you can't prove that the Christians borrow this idea. Sure, fine. But this is something that's like pretty damn specific for a theology,
If you want to just jump ahead a few slides to this is all going into the resurrection of Christ, but if you jump to where it's the pyramid texts.
Okay.
Is the heading.
There we go.
So here's some of the text. Osiris awakes. The languid god wakes up. The god stands up. The god has power in his body. Raise yourself, O king. Receive your head. Collect your bones. Gather your limbs together. Throw off the earth from your flesh. Rise up, O king, for you have not died. Raise yourself.
Oh, he glitched out. It's okay. He'll be back. We had a feeling this would happen. So it's all good. I'm gonna read it for him while he's gone. Raise yourself, O king, receive your head, collect your bones, Gather your limbs together, throw off the earth from your flesh, rise up, O king. You have not died. That sounds like a salvic religion, like afterlife, surviving death. You know what I mean? These are ideas that you see in Platonism and Christianity. Raise yourself, loose your bonds, throw off your dust. Derek's back. Oh, no, he's not yet. Okay. Raise yourself because your strength. May you ascend to the sky. May you have power in your body. Now, to me, the Osiris thing is pretty specific in the sense that it's talking about taking part in a ritual. Like in the Eucharist, you're taking a part in a ritual. You're drinking the blood of Christ and eating the body of Christ, and that you will have eternal life. But in these texts, these pyramid texts, or some of them are from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, you literally are going to this place called Amentet. Amentet is basically like the Egyptian word for heaven. And Osiris, you become Osiris in the sense where he brings you there to Amentet, where you dwell by the king Osiris. Here he is. I read the whole thing, so you don't got to read it.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this stuff is absolutely descriptive of physical resurrection, and it's even talking about the body having to being pieced back together and throwing the earth, the dust off from your flesh as one rises. As I note here, some of these invocations are directed at the deceased king, who is the earthly representative of Osiris. So the king is undergoing what Osiris himself underwent. So it's absolutely descriptive of the Osirian myth.
Yep.
The apologists, what they try to do is they say, well, Osiris does not experience an earthly sojourn following his resurrection. He remains in the netherworld from that point forward, and this is something of a red herring. The earliest depiction of Christ's resurrection in the New Testament is one in which resurrection and exaltation are a synonymous event. He's exalted up to heaven to be with God, and the earthly sojourn comes a good deal later in the Gospels, where he's hanging around for either a 24-hour period or 8 days or 40 days as in Acts. But the earliest depiction does appear to have been one of a resurrection exaltation complex in which he doesn't have an earthly sojourn either, but Paul still claims that he was resurrected. He uses the word anastasis. So
again, this is one of those things where we're arguing over the minute details, but again, this is still it's still the same type of concept. Also, I wonder if you know about this. The Horus, there are some texts, I think it's called the London medical or the London Egyptian text or something like that, where there's an actual text where Horus being born is taking on a rebirth of his father Osiris. Are you aware with this?
That's part of the mythos as well, and that Horus is it's kind of like in Catholicism where the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth.
Yeah.
It's all rooted in sacral kingship. So Horus is the earthly representative of Osiris, while Osiris is in the netherworld, which is practically analogous to the Christian heaven. In ancient Egyptian religion, whether we're talking about Amenti or the Duat, this was not like the Hebrew Sheol or the Greek Hades, where they're just, these dead spirits that are mindlessly going their way in the afterworld. These were very much living entities, living corporeal entities at that. So Osiris was known as the king of the living, not the dead. The modern title, Book of the Dead, is a misnomer, as Egyptologists have pointed out.
Wow.
This was not about death. This was about life, eternal life in a new realm. So,
and the whole idea of embalming the dead and wrapping them up as mummies, why else would you do that unless you're hoping for them to resurrect?
Yeah, the body would live on, absolutely. And if you can even skip ahead to the actual, go to the very next slide, in fact.
This one?
Yeah, that one right there. I mean, this just shows you, go back.
I saw it. It was a delay.
So this is from a Ptolemaic Roman temple at Dendera in ancient Egypt, 2nd to 3rd century BC. So this is getting closer to the Common Era. And what you find here is, I mean, pretty vivid iconography showing Osiris being bodily raised in his tomb. I mean, it's resurrection. There's no disputing.
Yeah, that's straight up resurrection.
Right. And of course, this also goes to show that he's initially raised in his tomb on earth. The pyramid texts even describe him confronting Set in the officials' enclosure of Heliopolis. So you do have a brief moment on earth before he goes to the netherworld. So
wait. What does that remind you of? Someone resurrects for a brief moment and then bounces back to the netherworld. Who does that remind you of?
Yeah,
Jesus.
I mean, it's certainly, it fits the pattern. So however you try to argue this, if you're an apologist, there's no denying you have a bodily restoration to life, even if he goes on to another worldly realm, just as Christ does. It's still resurrection. The other strategy they'll employ is, as with any mythic figure in the ancient world, you had variation on the theme. So the claim is not that these figures were depicted as resurrected in every time, place, and text. You have some texts, such as in Plutarch's on Isis and Osiris. He does seem to suggest that the body of Osiris remained in its tomb, not resurrected. So the apologist will zero in on that and say, see, there never was a resurrection.
Well, that's like with Dionysus. If you only read Euripides' Bacchae, you're not going to get a resurrection and death of Osiris. But if you do what Nonus did, Nonus has a text called the Dionysica, where he takes the myth of Zagreus and Bacchus and puts them all into one narrative, because that's the mythos. You don't just look at one text.
There's variation in the New Testament's depiction of Christ's fate as well. Is he raised in a spiritual body where flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God? Some kind of body, to be sure, but not anything like what we have now.
And with the case,
is it that, or does he actually have flesh and bone, as you see he has in Luke? The Gnostics and Docetists didn't think that Jesus ever incarnated in a fleshly body, so he could not have actually been crucified and killed in the flesh. There's no resurrection because there's no death, essentially.
Yeah, should we hone in on that then? Should we just focus on that text and be like that? Like, oh, that's all that matters, guys. This is that one text. But you know what?
The claim is it's not that these figures are resurrected per every time, place, and text. It's that if you do study the mythography, so to speak, that you will find that there are resurrection tales among the stories told of them.
Yeah, and with the case of Dionysus, you literally have him coming back as a fleshly human being born of a mortal woman. His first incarnation, he was the son of Persephone and Zeus, God. In his second coming, he literally has a mother who's just a normal mortal woman, and he is born, he comes in. And what's so funny about this is when he comes back, he actually, what he wants is to be believed in. It's not like he's doing, like, I don't know, compared to like Hercules or something like that. He's coming back to start a sort of cult-like following, kind of like Jesus. He's starting to make sure you believe in me type of thing, which is very specific too. There is a super chat that says, does Romulus resurrect? What about Osiris? This is before you started talking about Osiris.
Okay, so Osiris most certainly in many of the texts and per the iconography that we find as well. Romulus, I'm not so sure about. Reading those texts, there are rumors that.
Oh, okay. So if you go to Livy, I should pull it up actually. If you go to Livy, you there?
There we are.
If you go to Livy, Romulus
literally
goes up into heaven, and I'm not kidding. If you guys don't believe me, I don't have the text in front of me. Please fact check me on this. Livy says that he goes to stands at the spot where Hercules was at the right hand of Zeus, and then gets brought back down and has one more battle and helps the Romans defeats the Sabines or something. And then he ascends back. So he actually does resurrect. That's according to Livy.
Well, what I was saying is that I'm not sure that you have rumors that that the Senate had conspired to have him killed, but it seems that the other legend that arose was that he had simply been taken up and divinized, that he didn't actually die. He was taken up while alive still.
Oh, I see.
So I'm not sure that's I'm not sure that's resurrection per se. It's still something analogous to what we find in the New Testament, that he is divinized,
Right.
immortalized, and taken up into heaven.
Well, I think it's close enough that you can say, like, it's like comparing, I don't know, how do I say this? There's enough attributes there where he's leaving the fleshly world, becoming deified, and coming back down as a god. This happens in Eshmun too, in Phoenicia, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. But yeah, you see this. This is
That's
a thing
something that people need to understand about the resurrection of Christ as it's depicted in the New Testament. It's not simply that he's brought back to life, you know what I mean, and then eventually dies again. His resurrection is also, it's an exaltation and a divinization. He is, as Romans 1:4 says, trying to remember how it's put, he became the Son of God in power at his resurrection. So there it is, it's equally an apotheosis. He's literally become an immortal God. So that's very comparable to what we see in such as the Romulus myths. Even though Romulus doesn't die per se, it's still an apotheosis and a divinization and exaltation.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, thank you for that super chat. Let's see. That's it for now. Do you want to go to another one?
Sure.
Oh, and you mentioned something that I thought about too. So with the case of Caesar's apotheosis, I would actually consider this to be not exactly a resurrection, but not at all. But it's close in the sense that they thought that, like people like Ovid and Virgil thought that when Caesar ascended into Venus, and he adopted Octavian, who took on the name Gaius Julius Caesar. They thought that Gaius Julius Caesar was avenging himself through Augustus when he went out and defeated Cicero and Brutus and Cassius, and like literally was like unstoppable. People wrote myths about this, him being like living through his father, basically. So it's kind of similar to the Horus Osiris idea a little bit, but not exactly a resurrection though.
Not exactly, because I think in the case of Julius Caesar, it's the idea is that he's taken up in his soul,
Right.
rather than a reanimated body.
Yeah.
So, it's still something analogous. It's you know what I mean? It's phenomenologically similar, but you wouldn't actually define that as resurrection.
No, I wouldn't either. Yeah. Do you want to go to another one?
Yeah, we can. Oh, no, stay here. Stay right here.
Okay.
Because this is another one of the most salient points about the Osiris myth. It's not just that he is raised from the dead and goes on to a new realm, but his resurrection is the prototype, the model for all the ancient Egyptians who hoped to be revived and raised and taken up into the ancient Egyptian afterworld, just as he was. So when it comes to the kind of salvation scheme involved here, it is something eerily similar to what we find in Christianity, where Christ's resurrection is the prototype of all future resurrectees. His resurrection was the model by which others could hope. Now, Osiris didn't die for sins or anything like that, so it's not exactly the same thing as we find in Christianity. But that the idea that his resurrection, what happened to him, is what the ancient Egyptians themselves hoped for. That he was the embodiment of what they themselves could experience. That is powerfully analogous to what we find in the New Testament. Does that mean that the early Christians borrowed the idea? Not necessarily, but it's eerily similar enough to make one wonder. I'll say that much. This was originally in ancient Egypt. This was a great honor reserved for the pharaoh, for the king. But over time, it was democratized so that even commoners in the ancient Egyptian world could hope to benefit from what Osiris had accomplished as well.
Yeah, I wonder, because a lot of the Osiris mythos has to do with agriculture, how they can, he's tied to their corn rising, he's tied to the fertilization of the crops. Isis is tied to the water in the Nile, and there's sort of like the combining of the water and the seed. There's an agricultural aspect to it, and I wonder if this is coming from like the Tammuz Ishtar, or Demutzi Inanna thing, where you have Tammuz, who is a agricultural deity. He's a shepherd. He is slain by the hands of demons, brought down to the underworld, which is in fall time, winter time, which is supposed to represent that. Inanna goes down and brings him back up, and springtime comes, which is the month Akitu festival, which was their first New Year's. Their months three months behind ours, or in front of ours. I mean, so anyways, there you get this idea of this agricultural dying and rising deity that I think is very prevalent, not just in Tammuz, but with Addis, Adonis, Ashmun, characters like that. Where do you see that as far as Osiris goes, and just anywhere else in general?
Well, I think that was part of the original inspiration for these stories. But what you have to understand is that what people were doing back then is they were seeing in the rhythms of nature, including vegetation and crop life, they were seeing what they had essentially hoped would be the fate for human beings as well. So, apologists will comment on this and say that all these were just all they did was symbolize the dying and rising of the crops, and that's all they ever were. They're just symbols, they're just metaphors for vegetation. That's all. And when they do this, they're telling one half of the story, because that is true. But it came to mean much more to many of the ancients, especially in the various mystery religions, and of course, concerning the Osirian cult in ancient Egypt. What they were seeing was what they hoped would be an exemplar of mankind's fate as well. That just as the crops die and rise again, so too can they do so by imitating, by undergoing the same process that the God who symbolized that underwent. So it came to mean a whole lot more to mankind than just plants.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because with Tammuz, we were just talking about, like how you said, it's not just about the nature rhythm. With Tammuz, there was an actual rite called the weeping for Tammuz, which is reflected in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel's shown the women weeping for the god Tammuz, and he says, "See this abomination? What you're going to see is way worse than this." And so, obviously, if they're talking about it in Ezekiel, it's obviously a big deal in that part of the world. They wouldn't just mention it for no reason. So, what that tells you is there was already a sort of movement, a sort of religious movement of people who are weeping for a dead god. And for me, it reminds me of weeping the women at the cross, at the weeping for Jesus, right? I wonder if there's something going on there. Obviously, we can't say for sure, but like that, it does, like you said, it's analogous. I think there's a delay. You there?
I think I'm losing you there, Neil.
Yeah, you're still here. You're still here, but you're just delayed a little bit. It's okay. It happens. You there? Yo, yo, yo. Does this work? All right. It's all good. Let's go to the super chat. He'll be back. Janet McKinnon. He did warn me about this. Like in his defense, he was like, "I don't even know if we should do it. My computer's acting up. I'm having a lot of, my streaming's been bad." And I was like, I'll just go. Who cares? So in his defense, he did warn me. Janet McKinnon, thank you so much for the second super chat. Really appreciate this. You really help out my channel a lot. These super chats is what keeps this channel going. Really, really appreciate it. What is the myth of Ashmun? Is he another deity like Asclepius? You must have watched my Ashmun video. Because yes, and that's not my opinion. Damascus, who is a Neoplatonist, literally says that he's the Beirut, he's the Asclepius of Beirut. He's basically like, that's what he says. He's basically the same as Asclepius of Beirut. And in his myth, which we have from Phoenician manuscripts, and it's written in the tomb of Eshmun. It's in Beirut. There's stuff written on the walls there too. And in his myth, he's immortal. He's a son of this god named Siddiq, who has a mortal wife. He has 7 sons that are called the Cabieri, but his 8th son is immortal, and it's Eshmun. His name means 8th. The word 8th is Shmoneh in Hebrew, but the word Eshmon means oil. So he's like an oil healer god, and he meets Venus, or in this case Astarte, and she falls in love with him, which you're going to see all over these myths. There's always a goddess falling in love with the agricultural god. You get this with Demeter and Yasios. You get this with Attis. You get this with Adonis and Venus. But in this case, it's Astarte and Eshmun, and he castrates himself just like Attis does for this goddess. He bleeds out and dies, and then she raises him up into heaven, makes him into a god, and he comes back down, and he becomes the Asclepius of Beirut, according to Damascus and Sancho Niathan. Those are both quotes from them, not me. But that's, to me, I think this is the most obvious example of not only just a dying and rising god, but one that exists in Semitic world.
And for that matter, Osiris was known to ancient Jews as well. We find ancient Egyptian artifacts throughout the Levant. Go figure, ancient Egypt ruled the place from the 16th to 11th centuries BC. So we're talking about half a millennium Egypt ruled Canaan. So ancient Egyptian presence was absolutely there. And we do find biblical texts such as, I want to say it's Psalm 72, if I'm not mistaken, where there's, it talks about David's role as God's earthly regent, and it's eerily similar to a hymn to Osiris, where Osiris and Horus play the same roles essentially as God and David. So I'm getting this from Zondervan's Archaeological Study Bible. It was the publishers, the authors involved in that work, who are saying, yeah, there's definitely something going on here. This is a pretty interesting piece of partaking of ancient Egyptian literature. These are Christians. These are not diehard atheists making this claim. They're fully admitting, yeah, there's something going on here. But of course, they do the special pleading and say, but in the case of Christianity, it's all true. So they were certainly aware of this myth. Ancient Jews were, and that's why, though I am careful to draw the distinction, logical similarity in which you have something genetically borrowed, and simply an analogical one where it's just something that is similar because it arises from the same general mode of ancient thinking, so to speak. One could argue that that there's some evidence for the possibility of genealogical connections in a looser sense. Are you still with us, Neil?
Oh shoot! Now my camera's acting up. You can hear me, right?
Okay.
I'll fix it. Go ahead. You can keep going.
Okay, I'll keep rolling. So and then when we get to the myth of Baal in ancient Canaan, and in fact, Neil, if you want to scroll ahead a few slides there,
Okay.
but Trygve Medinger, in his 2001 work, The Riddle of Resurrection, he makes a very compelling case that there's definitely a death and resurrection going on here. It's been touch and go because we have major lacunae, that is fragments that are missing from the ancient Canaanite texts, where however it is that Baal is restored to life, we don't know exactly, but we do know that he is definitely dead. He is killed by Mot, and later he appears alive again. And in fact, he had battles it out, combats Mot, who is the god of death. So it's just a matter of simple inference, right? I mean, what do you suppose happened here? He was most certainly dead. He's alive again. There have been other theories proposed that, such as, maybe this was just a substitute for Baal, that Baal, did not actually die, but Medinger he just disposes of that completely and makes the case pretty compellingly that certainly Baal had to have been restored to life.
Yeah.
It is thought by some Hebrew scholars, such as John Levinson, John Day, and others, that it was the myth of Baal's death and resurrection that inspired some of the Hebrew authors and poets to speak of the metaphorical death and restoration to life of the nation of Israel.
Wow.
That they simply took the Baal myth and they reapplied it in a metaphorical way to Israel as a nation. Very compelling cases made for this by both John Day and John Levinson. John Day and Yahweh and the gods and goddesses of Canaan, and then John Levinson in, I cannot think of the title of the work, but if you look up my presentation, you'll find it on my Patreon. And again, it's another one of those things you'll find on both Myth Vision and my channel, Atheologica. It's called From Baal and Osiris to Christ.
Wow.
And so the Israelites themselves, speaking of the restoration of the nation, may well have been drawing on that mythical template of Baal itself.
Yeah, that gives us two Semitic gods that have this dying and rising thing happening with them.
Right.
But what you said though is so profound though. Like Eshmun is in his own world. The Phoenicians they have a king named Eshmunetzer, which means Eshmun saves. Was like, okay, he was a salvation god too. But with Baal, they're talking about the possibility. A lot of these scholars are talking about the possibility of Israel becoming sort of personified, as we see in Isaiah 53, the suffering servant. When Isaiah, whoever wrote it, is talking about Israel as a person, like he suffered, he did this. And obviously, if you read the whole text, you can see that it's Israel is the servant of Yahweh. So it is the nation of Israel, but he personifies it into the point where it almost seems like you're talking about a person, which in turn probably or maybe could have influenced Christian theology. That right there, you can see the connection from 1, 2 to 3.
I'm absolutely certain it did. I'm very much convinced of that. That look at what 1 Corinthians 15 says. Christian apologists love to bring up 1 Corinthians 15 and the ancient creed that's embedded there. But really look at what it says, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. This is telling us the provenance of this idea. They found it in scripture. And I have no doubt that Isaiah 53, in fact, Isaiah 52, verse 13 through 53, was a very useful template for early Christians. That's where they found the notion of their suffering and rising Christ. That's not to say that Jesus was not a historical person. In fact, I think he probably was. I think that he probably was historically crucified and killed, but it would have been all too easy to find those such passages in order to reconcile the tragedy and say, oh, this must be they weren't really expecting the Messiah to get killed.
Right.
But if you're looking for some way to reconcile the tragedy and you go digging into the scriptures to find it, you're going to find it. This is not far-fetched. This is what religious movements, fervent religious and political movements, if they make a prediction such as Trump will win again, and it doesn't come to light, they come up with some 2-bit ad hoc piece of rationalization for why things really worked out in their favor. Maybe it wasn't quite the way they expected, but you know what I mean? They find a way to rationalize what went wrong. And I think the tragic crucifixion of their leader, Jesus, they weren't just going to pack up and go home. They had too much writing on this guy, and they found a way to reconcile it. As the creed says, according to the scriptures, they found it in scripture. And if you look at Isaiah 53, in fact, the preceding verse, 52, verse 13, it says what? That this the servant will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. That would be his fate. So yeah, I think the resurrection of Jesus certainly stems from that, as well as other passages in the Psalms and in Hosea that speak of this kind of metaphorical death and restoration, again, as applied to Israel, but now individualized in the figure of Jesus.
Yeah.
And those passages, in turn, have an older pedigree. Quite plausibly in these older dying rising god myths, such as those of Baal. Go figure, the ancient Israelites were just a continuance of the ancient Canaanites. I mean, we can pretty well tell this not just from the artifacts that they left behind and the kinds of the gods they continued to worship in ancient Canaan, as we even see reflected in the Hebrew Bible, but we now know even from genetics.
Yeah.
Even from genetics.
And linguistics, the language is purely Semitic. Like there's,
right.
You know,
so not exactly a shocker here that
right.
They should be drawing upon these older myths in order to speak of their nation Israel in these poetic sort of victorious ways, so to speak. And then that in turn gets literalized and individualized in the life of Christ, so that essentially I think it quite likely that there is a genealogical connection here, but it's a much looser connection. It's sifted through the essentially through Judaism as the conduit, so to speak. It's not a matter of early Christians simply looking around, noticing that there are other dying and rising gods and inventing their own. It's something more complex than that, which human dynamics and historical goings on tend to be. So yeah, I think I've said enough about that, haven't I?
Yeah, no, that was great. Let me think. I'm trying to think. Do you want to go to like? Let me ask you this: because you get like characters like Adonis and Adonis, and their death is very like central to their stories. They get weeped over. My camera, and see, we're just having tons of difficulties today, but I'm just gonna keep talking. Whatever. I'll fix that.
God's not happy with this.
Yeah, no. So okay, so with the idea of Adonis and Adonis, they die. Like Adonis gets killed from getting bitten by a boar while he's hunting, and then Venus comes back down from her swan-led chariot in the sky, which is pretty awesome if you think about it. She comes back down and she cries over him, and her tears mix with his blood in this, and then a rose comes out of the ground, which is similar to this, to also what happens with Apollo and his boyfriend Iconography, where Iconography gets killed and Apollo cries and his tears mix with the blood, and a rose comes up. And then you see this with Addis as well. I wonder what it's not exactly a resurrection, but it's almost like they say that every year this rose will come back up to signify that Adonis is, back into the world. And then it's Fraser that tells us this. Fraser, and I think this is true actually. There is a river in like somewhere in like Phoenicia, or I guess it's not modern day Lebanon, where the river actually turns red during the springtime, because when the rains start to fall during those seasons, it knocks off all the sandstone that's on the mountain, and it goes into the river. It turns red, and they say that's Adonis's blood. So would this be a kind of a resurrection? It's a seasonal thing.
I mean, it certainly symbolizes the conquest of death and the yearning for immortality, even if it's not a quote unquote resurrection in this instance. You won't hear me talk about Addis too much because of the sources are fairly late. Adonis, we do know from Lucian in the 2nd century that there was a death and resurrection ritual here, and this is another one of those that's taken up by Mettinger in The Riddle of Resurrection, where he again argues pretty convincingly that there is a resurrection scenario here. And interestingly enough, Lucian is talking about this this whole scene as taking place in Byblos, where the ancient Egyptian religion was going strong. The worship of Osiris was very likely prevalent there.
Yeah.
So this is quite likely a
Oh, and that's right, because
syncretization.
Osiris, when Isis finds Osiris, when she goes and finds his coffin, it's in Byblos, and what's
Mhm.
coming out? Pine trees growing from the coffin of him. And Adonis, I just learned this from Dr. Litwa. By the way, the course is in the description. He talks about it in the course how the pine trees were central to these characters, where they would decorate pine trees and stuff like that during their holy weeks, the Holy Week of Addis in March, stuff like that.
So yeah, we probably get a resurrection of Adonis as a result of contamination with the Osiris myth. Prior, he wasn't really. You did have something of a catabasis type myth where he goes underground and he reemerges, sort of comparable to a death and resurrection, but really more technically catabasis.
Yeah.
But it seems as though because of the syncretization with Osiris there in Byblos, by the 2nd century at least, you had a resurrection myth about Adonis.
Here's what Ovid says about Adonis's death. Okay, here it is. Adonis's dying groans to thither turned her snowy bird. This is her in the sky turning around. And when from heaven on high she saw him lifeless, writhing in his blood, she rent her garments, tore her lovely hair, and bitterly beat her breasts, and springing down, there's that mourning thing that we see everywhere, reproach the fates. Even so, not everything shall own your sway. Memorials of my sorrow, Adonis shall endure each passing year. So wait a minute, is he dead or is he alive? Then you find out in the hymn to Demeter that he's in Hades for 6 months of the year, and he's allowed to come back because of the deal with Persephone. You kind of have to do some like scholarly shit to figure this out. So
Right.
the deal that Persephone goes down, she makes a deal with Hades that she gets to leave for half of the year, but Adonis has to come down. So Adonis's death, he gets to go back up for half the year. And then it says at the end of this print, she goes, my prince, sweet scented on his blood, with the touch swelled up as a pond when the showers fall, clear bubbles form, a blood red flower arose like the rich bloom of pomegranates with stubborn rind conceals their seeds, so lightly cling its petals fall so soon. When the wind blows, the flower gives its name. Like every year, the flower grows back again. So it's not like a bodily resurrection. It's like not like that at all. It's a lot more metaphorical, a lot more poetic.
Yeah,
I guess
this is more the notion that new life emerges from death,
right.
which is very much in the vein of the mystery religions, and we find mystery religion conceptualism, terminology, all of that kind of thing in the New Testament for sure, even as early as Paul. I mean, it's just Paul is swimming in mystery religion type terminology and soteriology, that is salvific schemes, the whole notion of dying with Christ
The
and
camera
being
died.
raised with him. Very much a mystery religion idea. Go figure. I mean, Paul is a Hellenized Jew from Tarsus, and he's
Right.
trying to convert other Gentiles. He's going to employ those kinds of motifs. Not at all surprising.
That's such a good point. Paul is, when you look at Paul and James, I don't know, whoever wrote James probably wanted to make him sound like James. So I'll agree with Christians that it probably said something like what James would have said. Whatever, I'm fine with that. But the differences are big because in one sense we're sticking to the law and we're sticking to doing works, not just faith. But in Paul's case, oh, come on, let's be a little laid back. Let anybody can join. Just have faith, and yeah, okay, you're gonna eat meat sacrificed to idols. Who gives a shit? It's all good. We're all having fun here. Like Paul knows his audience. He knows
he knew how to market it.
He knew how to market it. Yeah,
he knew how to market it. And you touched on the women at the tomb thing. I do not think that that's any mistake at all. I don't think it's a coincidence. Mind you, when I talk about when I talk about the origin of belief in Jesus's resurrection, as we find it in Christianity, among the earliest Christians, I think that probably arose within a more Jewish milieu, looking back to the scriptures, as well as the dominant theme there in the Second Temple period of an imminent resurrection of the dead. I think all of that played a role. But by the time you get to the later Gospels, these are, I agree with Robin Faith Walsh and others that these are cultural elites who
Yeah.
are very much trained in that type of rhetoric in the ancient world. They're familiar with the work of other Greco-Roman authors like Livy and Ovid and so forth. It's
Absolutely.
no mistake that they are using this kind of motif, the women being present at the tomb, um, because of the fact that it does very much fall in line with that pattern.
Oh, you just died out as soon as Myth Vision had dropped. Oh,
Am
you're
I
back.
still
You back?
here?
Oh yeah. I mean, oh, that's.
I'm back.
I was hoping you didn't get kicked out. Okay. Yeah.
I
Finish.
don't think.
Come on, man. You just came back. We thought we had a second coming real quick. All right. Hopefully he'll be back soon. Derek from Myth Vision, thank you for the super chat. Derek is the greatest of all time. He is the Lamb of God. Lambert. Get it? Derek says, Derek, do you think we're missing something, which is why historicists rather than mythicists? I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Which is why we're historicists rather than mythicists. People join Derek and Neil's Patreon. This is what I was about to ask him. I'm not kidding, Derek. You beat me to it. I was about to ask him, after all of this being said, all these myths are so similar. How can we believe that there's actually a guy when they could just be basing it off all this stuff? And I guess while we're waiting for Derek, I'll just give my opinion on that. Because they're obviously so there's nothing to, for the case of Jesus, right? There are no sources in the Judeo-Christian Greco-Roman world that are contesting his existence at all. Like, it's not even mythicism's not even a thought early on. Celsus is in the 2nd century. He's talking about, he has sources from the Jews that say that his father was a Roman soldier. I think there's enough there, and then there's the details of Pontius Pilate and how he was from Nazareth and all these really strange details that you don't just make up. I think there's enough there to say there probably was a guy. Then after a while, after he gets killed and he's the Messiah, they're trying to reconcile all this. They're going to look around at other things that happen for characters in mythology who die. By the way, you got to remember this. Christianity comes out of a vein of Judaism that also has Orphic ties. Very, very Orphic. So they're not like Philo. Read Philo. Philo's not just talking about Moses and Abraham. Philo's talking about Plato. He's talking about Dionysus. He's talking about all these other characters from the Greek world too. That's what Christianity is coming out of. It's coming out of Greek Hellenized Judaism. So it's not a crazy thing for them to be looking at all these other Adonises and stuff like that. But yeah, you're back.
I'm back. I was just saying with regard to the women at the tomb, like this just fits the pattern of ancient religion, right? In the 1st century play by Seneca, Hercules Otaeus, we find Hercules had died on the pier, but he appears to his grieving mother, Alcmena, and he basically tells her, hey, refrain from mourning. I have been granted my place in heaven among the gods. So he appears to his weeping mother here. It's that same kind of role, the kind of Euros Gamos between the male divinity and the female divinity, that you find this kind of pattern or motif in the Gospels is probably not a coincidence. So the Christian apologists who argue that the women being at the tomb just doesn't make any sense unless it had really occurred because women were not trusted in the ancient world. They're wasting their time. It's a ridiculous argument. People who know better are never going to take this seriously. It's not even true what they say. I mean, you had misogynistic men in the ancient world, like Josephus says some pretty misogynistic things about women and whatnot. But it's just that was not true across the board, especially among early Christians. Christianity can be given credit for being somewhat progressive in the way that its attitude toward women and the downtrodden. Just look at the way Paul talks about women in Romans 16 and their leadership roles. Look at Acts. Look at John chapter 4, verse 39. It's a Samaritan woman who convinces a whole slew of Samaritans with her what? Her testimony. So they got to let this one go. It's not good. Of course, none of it is. I'm sorry. It's just,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't have a great deal of respect for apologetics. I
no,
don't.
I
It's
get
not
that. And
scholarship. It's
it's funny because
basically
Calcis actually addresses that point where he says, you want us to believe that no one saw this resurrected Jesus except for a couple women? Like, you want us to believe that? Like he addresses that thing, and that's the story that's everyone's kind of like addressing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's kind of funny. Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. The question was for you, Derek, by the way. Do you think we're missing something on why we're historicists rather than mythicists? I gave my 2 cents on it. I just don't like, look, if there's people say that asking for evidence for something that doesn't exist is kind of dumb. Like, how am I going to ask for evidence for a monkey that isn't? But for mythicism, evidence is required. For example, evidence would be somebody from the 1st or 2nd century saying Jesus didn't exist. Some of the Jews that don't think he existed. There is zero sources. And even the hostile witnesses like Celsus and the Jews are like, yeah, he existed. We just don't like him. He sucked. Like, there's nobody. To me, you need evidence. There is none.
That's an interesting point you bring up. Joseph McCabe, in his work, The Myth of the Resurrection, it's a early 20th century book that he wrote. That's one of his arguments, which is that the dead ringer here is that the Jews themselves did not deny that this was ever a real guy. Look, is mythicism possible? Sure. I just don't think that it's the most probable explanation. And I think
that's all we're saying.
And I think that there is some, I think there is some evidence for the historicity of Jesus. I know mythicism like the back of my hand, man. I used to be a mythicist.
Me too.
I know the arguments for why they are not convinced by the passages in Josephus or what we find in Paul. I know, I get it. I'm not persuaded by the mythicist arguments here. I'm just not. And what they'll often say is, well, if you're going to rely on, say the James passage in Josephus or what Paul says in Galatians 1 about him having a brother James, they think that's just a cultic brother. I don't think that makes a lot of sense given he's making a distinction here between Cephas and James. If it's just a cultic brother of the Lord, is not Peter one of those? Right. What's the point of the distinction here? But anyway, what they'll say is you're hanging all of this on a very flimsy reed to make a case for a historical Jesus. And what they don't understand is that, when it comes to doing history, look, the vast majority of people who have ever lived, all right, and that's an understatement. The vast, vast majority of people who have ever lived, we don't have one shred, not one iota of evidence that they existed. So that we have anything, that we have the teeniest, tiniest fraction of anything for a person's existence is actually pretty good in the broader schemes of things in terms of doing history. So I say it's good enough. I think that the cognitive dissonance theory of Christian origins makes the most sense. I mean, when you look at how fervent religious and political movements operate, the idea that you'd have this actual historical personage who had a following, they are looking to him as a potential Messiah. He gets crucified and killed, and boom, out pops Christianity. Just the opposite of what the apologists say. This would actually be the kind of thing that is the impetus for Christianity, claiming victory in the face of a tragedy. I just think that makes the most sense of Christian origins, and so I lean toward historicity to be sure. As to your question, Derrek, love that you're here, bro. Do I think that we're missing something? I don't think so. I think you and I both have immersed ourselves in mythicist literature. Like I said, I know it like the back of my hand. I know the arguments. In order to, I don't want to crack on mythicists too much. I love you guys. We're all essentially on the same team here, but no, I don't think we're missing anything, Bob.
No, and I agree. I think mythicists are correct in the sense that there is no evidence, physical evidence. There's no primary sources for this guy. We're basing it off of late extra biblical sources. We're looking at what Paul's saying, and mythicists will try to twist his words and say the Greek's ambiguous, and none of them will say that I actually know Greek. And if you actually ask someone who knows Greek, they'll say that's not true, which is kind of funny. But even that aside, when you make claims that there's a, like, I'm just going to say it, like, there's a prominent mythicist. I'm not even going to say who it is, but everyone's going to know who I'm talking about. There's a prominent mythicist, probably the biggest mythicist in the world, who claims that there's an angel in Philo called the Logos whose name is Jesus. It doesn't exist. When you make that claim, and anybody can go pick up Philo, I can just go pick up Philo and read and look for it, and it's not there. It looks like when Christians make claims that we can go and look and check and make that, and it just looks really bad. Like, you don't help the cause if you're trying to refute Christianity. You don't help by making things up. That's my point. You don't have to make this stuff up. Let's go with the fact. Let's go with what does it say? What does the text actually say? Okay, this is what the text actually says. Let's not try to impose our ideas on things. Well, Philo might have meant it was Jesus. Well, he could have thought it was about Jesus. No. It doesn't say that. It's not what it says. So let's not say it says that, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say that the mythicists are that they're lying or making things up. I think they are genuinely convicted of the position, just as I used to be. But you know what? Here's a good analogy. John Loftus talked about his experience as a Christian apologist, and he said this is what it was like. It was like having these different sticks in the ground, right, at different locations, and he's got a plate that he's spinning on each stick, but he's got to keep them spinning on each different stick. So he's got to hop from plate to plate, stick to stick, to keep each of them spinning. That's what doing apologetics was like for him, and it got exhausting. He finally got to the point where he's like, you know what, I can't. This hopping from one foot to the other, I can't do it anymore. It's easier to just let the plates fall and accept the cold, hard reality that I'm probably wrong.
Right.
That's what doing mythicism was like for me.
I got that. I got to that point too. I agree.
Yeah.
Like that was one of those things that made me a mythicist to begin with. When I watched that video of that speech of that PhD scholar from an Ivy League school saying, we have in the text of Philo pre-Christian sources of an angel named Jesus who's called the Logos, who will inherit the kingdom of heaven. I go, wait a minute. If that's the case, then this is all made up. They're just basing it off this. I became a mythicist instantly from that verse, and I didn't check into it for a long time, for months. Months go by. I start telling that to other people. I'm like, oh, did you know about this angel named? Oh no, I never heard about that. And then people start calling me out. Maybe not even just Christians, but like just people who care about the truth. And I'm like, oh, I have to defend it now. Now I got to go look for it. Oh shit, it doesn't even exist.
Right.
So like you said, it gets exhausting to be like that. Let's just deal with facts. Let's just be honest. Like, mythicism is correct for a lot of stuff, dude. They really are. Especially when how we started this whole show off with all these dying and rising gods. They're onto something here. Like the theology of Christianity clearly is not coming from just Jesus. You know?
Yeah, they are correct in the sense that, you know, I'm on their side. I'm on their team in the sense that, you know, granting a historical Jesus, that being the major difference, it still remains the case that the Christ of faith is very much a composite figure. He is an amalgamation he's an amalgamation of the ideas that were prevalent in that time and place in history.
Yeah.
He was deified in a manner that is fully consistent with the kinds of myths, legends, and motifs that we know about from that day and age. So they're absolutely right about this. And that scholar who shall remain unnamed, I do want to say that I appreciate him very much.
I do
He had
too.
some kind words about me recently. I'm indebted to him, even if I disagree with him on the whole
Absolutely.
historicity debate. He is, I think he's brilliant.
I do too.
I've
I do too.
learned a great deal from him. I'm indebted to him. So I am grateful for him, even if we disagree. He means a
Oh yeah,
lot to me.
he's a brilliant scholar. I mean, we're talking about someone who knows history, who's a real historian, who is also a philosopher as well, and knows what he's talking about. I would love to, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something in Philo I don't know about that. I would love to be corrected on that. But that I just was, I don't know. That was just on my mind. That's why I brought that up. I was talking to someone else about it before this started. I didn't mean to like focus on that one part, but like a lot of his other stuff is just excellent stuff. I think he's worthy of being.
Especially when it comes to doing analytic philosophy,
Yeah,
like arguments for and against the existence of God and so forth. He's
yeah,
a beast.
yeah,
He
absolutely,
is a beast.
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Wow, the super chats are dead today, but it's all good. It's all good. I still love you guys. But do you want to go? Do you have anything else you want to say? Do you want to promote So I do want to promote this though. So you guys just got a little taste of this
Oh, yeah.
presentation. If you want the full thing, where can they go to get it?
Well, if you want to watch the full presentation as I give it, you can find it both on the Myth Vision podcast. There, I think it's titled "The Resurrection of Jesus is a Myth," and it's also on my channel on atheologica, titled "Resurrection and Exaltation." Um, but if you want to be able to actually download the slide presentation as a PDF and have it available for your own perusal, you can do that by joining my Patreon. You'll find it there.
There we go. Now, before we close this thing out, I just want to touch on this. I was skimming through and I just saw this. This is the last one. This is one of the big ones to me because of the details. Do you want to run this down real quick and then we'll be done? The Inanna thing?
Yeah, Inanna was a Sumerian goddess of fertility, known as the Queen of Heaven. In the descent of Inanna, the goddess descends to the underworld to conquer her sister Erishkigal, queen of the underworld. After passing through 7 gates, losing 1 garment per each, and ultimately her power, that's what that signified, Inanna is struck dead and hung from a hook. 3
Oh,
days and 3 nights pass until the god Enki finally creates 2 sexless creatures from the dirt who descend to the underworld and revive Inanna with the food of life and the water of life.
and you have these details. You have the 3-day motif. She's down in hell for 3 days and raises up. You have being pinned to a what is it again? It's nailed to not a cross, but like nailed to a hook. Like that's
She's hung from a hook. Yeah.
yeah, that's very
Yeah.
strange. And you have to and the question is, do people in Judea in the first century know this text? Well, they do. They do. Right before this, they have the book of Esther, and the book of Esther basically repurposes this text and euhemerizes Inanna as this character Esther, and she has the same kind of story where she goes through 7. I think it even says gates, but she goes through like 7 rooms, and finally in the last room, she's in front of the king of Persia, and she's sitting at the table. I think it's for like 3 days or something like. Yeah, it's 3 days actually. It is 3 days, and then she saves this character named starts with an M, whatever his name is. She saves him from his about to be dead, which he kind of plays the role of Demutzi, and because Inanna goes down and saves Demutzi from his damnation and rises him up, and then it says in the Ishtar tablet that on their rise up they bring the dead with them. They resurrect the dead with them. Now that's pretty. There's something going on there.
And what people have to realize is that it was so common in the ancient world for actual historical people like Plato, Alexander the Great, Caesar Augustus, Apollonius of Tyana, for actual historical personages to be deified and mythologized in manners that were consistent with these kinds of motifs. So none of this necessarily points to there being no historical Jesus. Again, it's just very clear, it's obvious that he was deified in a manner that was very much along the lines of how people viewed the world back then.
Yeah, you're gonna, when something happens to the Messiah, you're gonna be like, "How? What? Well, this doesn't make sense. This wasn't in Daniel. What are we? We gotta find other stuff. Well, oh, Anana. This happened with Anana. Like, you know what I mean? So you could see that happening. What I think is a good question that people don't talk about is, did he really go down to Jerusalem during the Passover? Because that's kind of a coincidence. That's kind of a major coincidence, because all these other dying and rising myths are agricultural and they have to do with these equinoxes and solstices. And this would be very coincidental. I'm just throwing the mythicists a bone here. It's very coincidental that Jesus goes down to Jerusalem right around that spring equinox, dies, and like it sort of matches the equinox thing. But it's possible. That's also possible too, that it could have happened. He could have died on the equinox. You know?
I mean, it's you could argue that either way, right? Like it's you know, they have him, what they have him brought before the Sanhedrin on Passover Eve, which is already a historical unlikelihood, right? That they're going to be doing this on Passover Eve. That's just probably not historical. It's probably more literary and symbolic.
Yeah.
But, you know, could it be the case that it would have been during Passover that he would make a point to take that journey? That's possible too. So
yeah, that's another thing I thought about as well. And that it also would explain why Christians have it backwards, because the Passover lamb is not a sin atonement. The Yom Kippur goat is a sin atonement. So if he did really die during Passover, and the Christians make the Passover lamb the atonement for sins, that would make sense, because they're getting it wrong. But they only would get it wrong is if they're forcing their idea, they're forcing it on to Jesus, who died on the Passover. So that does actually make sense. Otherwise they wouldn't. Otherwise they would just say he's, you know, Yom Kippur goat or whatever. But anyways, by the way, before I get to this, before I get to your super chat, somebody corrected me. I want to read it out. Instead of being hung for 3 days, Esther fasts for 3 days, and so do all of her kingsmen. That's a good point, Asher. Thank you for that. Oh, that's Ariel. Yeah, what's up, Ariel? I didn't know you got a new name, I guess. So thank you for that correction, Ariel. And this is big, guys. Tomorrow I'm talking with Inspiring Philosophy, big channel. We're going to be talking about Christian varieties. You know, this is my big topic. I always have Litwa on my channel. What's up with these Christian varieties, and why are they heretical? You know, why should we agree with the Nicene Creed in 2022? Why can't the Nicene preacher be why can't we have a Church of the Nicenes in 2022? Like, what's going on? Why are we still holding on to these dumb ideas? That's what I'm going to talk to him about. What do you think about that?
I think that sounds great. And you guys have got to get me you've got to get me into one of these
debates
talks at some point along with Litwa, because that's I'm a
Will he come back? Will he not? You there?
Am I still here?
Yes, you're there. You're alive.
All right. I'm a huge fan of Litwa, and I'm hugely indebted to him as well, especially his Jesus Dios, the early Christian depiction of Jesus as a Mediterranean god. I love that book.
Yeah,
I've learned so much from it. A lot of the texts and sources I cite are from that one in particular. It's one among the ones that I cite, of course, but huge fan of Litwa. So I would love to actually speak directly with that guy at some point.
Yeah,
Litwa's a fan, buddy.
Yeah, Litwa's great. You know, I could definitely hook you up with Litwa. But yeah, so go to the YouTube channel called Break the Rules and check out for my discussion tomorrow with Inspiring Philosophy. It should be interesting. Obviously we don't agree on a lot of things. It's not a debate, just a discussion, but you know, it'll be fun. It'll be interesting. Just my first time ever actually meeting the guy. I never met him. Actually, no, I met him one time in a Bart Ehrman recording session, and it was like for like I didn't say anything to him though. But yeah, this will be kind of fun. We'll do that. But enough of that. And I just before we go, are you there? I think we lost you again. But I do want to tell everybody that in the description, let me just pull it up actually. In the description of this video right now, we have shoot. Let me see. Atheologica. There it is. I'm going to pull up his channel. Guys, go and subscribe to Derrek Bennet's channel.
You should do a YouTube channel, Derek. Hey, why don't you do a YouTube channel? Shut up.
They have the I wasn't showing it. I wanted to show it. Okay, hold on. I'm all screwed up here. So hold on a second. Atheological. There we go. Guys, here's Eric. Here's a shim.
You should do a YouTube channel, Derek. Hey, why don't you do a YouTube channel? Shut up. I'm an adult. I'll do whatever I want. But yeah, I'll do a YouTube channel. It seems perfectly reasonable. That's fine.
Yes.
Smart ass.
Go and subscribe, guys. Atheologica.
Hello, everyone. I'm Derrek Bennet, and welcome to my YouTube channel.
So, by the way, if you see that the red there, I can't subscribe because I'm not signed in. So, but yeah, I definitely have that bell hit, and you should too. Oh yeah, and there's also the Patreon. Let's show that Patreon off real quick. Let's show that baby off. Patreon, guys. Derrek Bennet. Help him out, guys. Throw him a bone. Throw him a monthly subscription, and you'll get all access to all these posts and videos that are not available to the public, only to the select chosen, the initiates.
And I am begging you for your help, because I got to tell you, I'm really struggling trying to do all this stuff and work a job on top of it. My car is broken down to where it's undrivable. I'm making a lot of sacrifices in order to do this, so I could use all the help I can get.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Lev. I thought I did tell him where it was, but it's breaktherules.tv or YouTube Break the Rules as well. But yeah, there you go. Breaktherules.tv. Sorry about that. But yeah, back to what you were saying. No, I honestly think that you're doing such great work, and you really should have a lot more support for what you're doing. You're really tackling issues that a lot of scholars don't go into. Very few do. But you're keeping it very scholarly yourself, and you're sticking to the sources. You're sticking to the main primary sources, and bro, it's priceless stuff. I watch your channel every time you have a new video out. What's your next video you're putting out? Oh, we lost him again. Well, there we are. Did you hear what I said?
I did. I caught, not really. You said I'm doing such great work, which I agree.
I said, what is your newest video coming out that you haven't finished yet, that you're about to release? This is just one of those days where things are just, it's not even his fault either. It's partly my fault too. My computer's acting crazy right now. Or not my computer, my camera. I got a new cord, and for some reason, maybe I just don't know how to use it, but it just keeps turning off, like whatever. But there you are. So what was your next video coming out?
We're going to have a little fun with Cameron Bertuzzi in my next one.
Oh,
it could be out tonight.
Really? All right, I'll share it on my community tab as soon as it's ready.
It's going to be just a short one, less than a minute.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see it. I can't remember too. He's a funny guy over there. I can only imagine what you're going to say, though. It's going to be good. But yeah, that's enough for today. And thanks for coming. And you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over